Big cut heart of Chile, lived like a shooting star. He fought for the people of Chile with his songs and his guitar. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. Big cut heart was a peasant. He worked from a few years old. He sat upon his father's plow and he watched the earth unfold. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. Now when the neighbors had a wedding, one of their children died. His mother sang all night for them, with Victor by her side. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. He grew up to be a fighter against the people's wrong. Listened to their grief and joy, and he turned them into song. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. Stood in the stadium, 1,000 voices strong. They sang about their hopes and dreams, though the general did them wrong. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. Big cut heart of Chile, lived like a shooting star. He fought for the people of Chile with his song and his guitar. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong. His hands were gentle, his hands were strong.
I'm so glad you all could come. I'm glad you could change your schedules like you were able to. That meant a lot to us. We had Larry and Peggy were, on their deathbeds almost. But I'm actually kind of doubly pleased that we had it here instead, because this is one of the two places that Fernando held court, in a way. The man didn't really need a house; he needed a porch. That's all he needed. He loved to sit out on his porch and
drink his wine,
do his talking, his business, talking to all the neighbors. That's how we got to meet so many of them. He probably knows more Mebanites than I do. So this is actually the time of day that he would have come over. We would have sat right over here, and he would have, you know how his voice, you gotta go, what a place you gotta go, the garden looks great, you know how he is. So I'm gonna miss that a whole lot. We met here, and we met on his porch. He rented from our good friend Kevin here for years when he first moved to town. We met, just to digress, we met in '94. I was on a team building his house in Carla's in Chapel Hill. And we just, talked in passing on the job, didn't really, just a client, right? And then, I don't know when it started, but he would call, I would go over to his house, he would call me up, hey, come on over, I got some, thing started like business-wise, things to show you. Maybe you could do a laundry room, or maybe you could do this. So I'd go over, and then we didn't have wine together, which was, a tradition, you know, de rigueur with Fernando. We always had a glass of wine together. And so we got to talking, and then I, you know, started visiting him socially. He'd call once in a while. Dave Sheen, he's here. We would hang out on his porch. Tad would come over sometimes and talk on, you know, I don't know if any of you know what his favorite subject is. Right? We'd talk politics, and this guy was astute. So anyway, that's where we got started. We moved here to Nevin, and he always said, I moved here because you lived here. And it's like, you know, thanks, but you know, I don't deserve that credit. And he lived at Kevin's place, and he was known on the block. The kids, did they have a name for him, or they just call him Fernando? But the children, he loved watching the children play on the street. I think that harkened back to maybe Recife. How do you pronounce it? Recife? Pardon me? His hometown, Recife. Okay, sorry. I don't know. Did he do that? Did he sit and watch people, kids playing on the street?
Well, not there, because you know, when we came here, we were so young.
Okay.
So, but he loved his niece, the nephew, every kid from both sides of the family.
Well, that was a new side of him I had never seen. His love for children, and they got to know him and would hang out on his porch and ask him questions and stuff. Well, I think they liked his accent. You know, he smoked cigarettes. You know, different kind of guy. Never sat on his porch and did nothing. He was either talking on the phone with somebody or on his computer. If I could characterize him, I don't know, an angry optimist, maybe, something like that. He was probably one of the most passionate social justice warriors that I knew. I mean, and he kept up on everything. I mean, he knew every country, what was going on, how people were being oppressed. And, you know, so we talked with them. Those were lots of our conversations. I made a couple of notes. Oh yeah, we used to talk. He was really into Luis Inácio Lula da Silva.
Oh, yeah.
And Fernando would even quote this sometimes. Here's a quote. In Brazil, a poor man goes to jail when he steals. When a rich man steals, he becomes a minister. So he would say stuff like that. We were also into Stephen Biko, and we would sing this. I don't know songs about Stephen Biko that were written by yeah. It's one of Stephen Biko's quotes. From time to time was, as angry as we have the right to be, let us remember that we are in the struggle to kill the idea that one kind of man is superior to another kind of man.
Amen. Yes, sir.
So, he changed my life, just like any good friend will do to you. You find out, you learn things about yourself that you didn't know before, brings out things in you that you didn't know you had. And I'm really going to miss that with him. But, you know, every time I come out on this porch, I'll be able to just say, oh, this is a Fernando day, something like that. I'm sure I had more to say, but thank you. And if anybody has any words, want to come up, and
Yeah, Carla,
please do.
like the next. Yeah.
Well, I've known Fernando since I was 14 when we started dating. Against my father's will. As we say in Brazil, he would like to see the devil, but not Fernando, until he got into medical school. So things changed his life, you know. But throughout the years, obviously, my father and Fernando, they had a wonderful relationship. I don't see him as his son drinking, and everybody here knows. But we kept our relationship. He was part and parcel of my life forever. And so I had to take care of all the legal things, and which I was completely unprepared for, because as much as I worried about him throughout the years and decades of our lives, I never thought it would end the way it did. But anyway, I did, and I have to say I have learned so much. Barry and Kevin and Deborah, primarily, and then of course later I have more friends that I have got to know, for all the help that they have given me, because living in Carbon, so far away from here, I don't believe I would have been able to take care of his house, get rid of the things that unfortunately had to be donated without their help. And I will forever be indebted to all of them. So, because I was taking care of his cremation and all the funeral things, if you will, I had to write his obituary. And it was during the first few days after he died. And for those who know, I was extremely emotional. I could not even talk on the phone without crying a lot. And so somehow this obituary was written in a matter of few minutes because it came from the heart. I felt that I would rather focus on the positive things that Fernando meant to me and to friends, and this is how it was written. So, again, you have read this, but I'm going to read once more.
Marla, closer to the mic.
See, I'm not a musician. It's better now. I would never be able to sing on your band. Dr. Fernando Augusto Pinto Ribeiro Neto, 63 years old, a resident of Mebane, North Carolina, passed away on Saturday, April 24th, 2021, at home. Fernando was born in Recife, Brazil, on April 12, 1958, and he was the son of Augusto Pinto Ribeiro and Marilady Figueiredo Ribeiro. He obtained his medical degree in Brazil and moved to the United States in the early 80s to follow a science-oriented career. He was a brilliant scientist who worked in renowned laboratories specialized in endocrinology, hormonal action, and cancer research. Fernando was highly respected by his colleagues and had many friends all over the world. He was a caring human being who was always available to help family and friends. He loved, you guys know, to discuss science and politics. Actually, if I can be honest, it was annoying.
Tell me.
And poetry. That one was not annoying. And he was an avid international soccer fan to the max. He had a deep appreciation for gardens and flowers, the songs of birds, and enjoying life at the beach. That's how we met. He survived by his parents, Mr. Augusto Pinto Ribeiro and Mrs. Marilady Figueiredo Ribeiro. His brothers, he had 3 brothers, Alexandre Henrique Figueiredo Pinto Ribeiro. Yes, in Brazil, Portuguese-wise, there are lots of names. Aristeu Ricardo Figueiredo Pinto Ribeiro and Glauco Augusto Pinto Ribeiro Jr. He has several nieces and nephews, and of course, he survived by me, his former spouse. Fernando had a beautiful soul, and he touched the lives of many. His passing is being felt with deep sadness by all who knew him. His life is being celebrated today and at a later time in Brazil, in Recife. I now would like to read a poem by the late Brazilian poet, singer, composer, Vinicius de Moraes. And the original title of this poem is Christmas. It's actually Natal. Well, the poem is not about Christmas, but I thought it would be appropriate because there is content, but also because a lot of things about Fernando were so contradictory. And so the title is Christmas, but it's about death and losing someone. And so I translated. For these we were made, to remember and to be remembered, to cry and make others cry, to bury our dead. For these we have long arms for goodbyes, hands to harvest what was given to us, fingers to dig the earth. Our lives will be like this. One afternoon, to always forget, a star to disappear into the darkness, a path between two thorns. Therefore, we need to watch over, speak and walk softly, watch in the night, sleep in silence. There is not too much to say. A song about a crib, a verse, perhaps of love, a prayer for whom left us. But this hour shall not forget, and for it our hearts should be left grave and simple. Thus, we were made for this, for hope towards a miracle, for the participation of poetry, to see the face of death. Suddenly, we will no longer wait. Today, the night is young. From death, simply, we are born immensely. And finally, I have just a paragraph of closing remarks. I could spend the whole day here talking, but no, that's fine. Fernando, perhaps for a lot of you guys here, I don't know, some perhaps I'll say yes. He used to recite the following quote from the movie Fitzgerald, directed by the filmmaker Herzog. And the quote is the following: "Life is an illusion behind which lies the reality of dreams." Unfortunately, Fernando's life was a huge illusion with many dreams, and he was not able to realize the reality of his life. Also, unfortunately to me, he died alone and unhappy. So I hope he's rest in peace. Thank you.
I met Fernando in 1991 when I came to Duke as an assistant professor. Fernando was a postdoc with Tony Means at the time. And we became friends. We saw a lot of each other, mostly over wine, I think, at night. But, Fernando loved to talk science with me. He loved to talk politics too, but I didn't know enough about politics, and I never went very far. But he did love science. At the end of the evening, he always had a couple of experiments I could have done, but maybe could still do. Because he was really interested in the problem. He thought a lot about it. And he worked with two Nobel laureates. Actually, one Nobel laureate and one Academy of Science member. And Fernando, he couldn't get enough of talking about science and analyzing the problem. And he would always have a new idea out of the. He would think out of the box, as they say, something you might not have even thought of. And so those were very fond memories. And the other thing he liked to do is use his chainsaw. So when Fran happened, you guys were here for Fran, the hurricane, we had a lot of oak trees on our house. Fernando would love that. Finally, he could use his chainsaw. So they say how in Brazil they deforest everything. Well, I think it's because of people like Fernando. If he saw a pine tree, he would call it a weed. So anything that wasn't an oak tree had to come down. So that was quite interesting. And so when I moved to Singapore 12 years ago, I had much less chance of meeting with Fernando, at most once a year, I think. We would meet at Weaver Street Market, buy a bottle of wine around 1 o'clock, and by 5 it would be finished, I think, between the two of us. And there would be more science and more politics, of course. And I'm going to miss those afternoons with Fernando. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm Jim Putney from Chapel Hill, and I've worked at NIEHS for the last 30 years or so, and that's where my connection with Fernando began. He was spending a lot of his research obviously, everyone here seems to have had these sort of same feelings. But one of the things that really impressed me about him is that he just has so much knowledge. And I at least, and I think many of you, we had the opportunity to sometimes benefit from that knowledge. So there was knowledge in sports, and he was always explaining to me the offside in soccer, which I never understood. And in politics, of course, as you said, we were like-minded, but he had a much broader database to understand what was going on than I did. And in science, and this sort of mirrors a bit of what Tony just said, sometimes Fernando would come into my office and have ideas about my research that I wasn't even aware of. That was really incredible. So I benefited from all of these things through my interaction with him, but importantly what I want to say is the thing that I've benefited most from my relationship with Fernando was his friendship. And I don't really know how to describe what a special kind of friendship Fernando gives to his friends. And that is something that I will miss very, very much.
Thank you.
I'm David Chin. I'm from Chapel Hill. You might see a picture of me with Fernando on the table. He was the best man I know. So, what I plan to do today is just give you a few anecdotes of Fernando and me. Some of them may not be too flattering, but I found them amusing. And maybe he didn't have these experiences with you, so you get a little more insight into him. So I met Fernando, like Tony Van Dongen said, when I came here from Houston to Duke. We were both postdocs in Tony Means' lab. And when we met, the first thing that he told me was he was Brazilian. So the first thing I responded immediately was, "Oh, you must love football," which is soccer to most people here. And that's how we first got connected. So we went out and we talked a lot about soccer. And what he really liked was when you told him that you loved Brazilian soccer. And genuinely, I did. So we would reminisce constantly about Brazilian soccer, and he would give me all these insights into the football in Brazil that I didn't know because I didn't come from Brazil. So, for example, he loved the Brazilian teams that won the World Cup, and they were legendary, even to me. So I'll tell you a few of the names. I learned these from my father. Players in the 58 and 62 World Cup, like Didi. My father loved Garrincha, and Fernando loved Nilson Santos. These are very great Brazilian football players. Nobody talks about them today. Of course, the great player that most people talk about from that World Cup was Pelé. But Pelé was a youngster, and those guys were the real stars. We talked about the 70 World Cup team. He loved that team. I loved that team. He loved Gerson and Tostão. My favorites were Jairzinho, Ribelino. Then those teams all won World Cups. But the team we really joined together on was the 82 World Cup team that didn't win. That was a fabulous team. And they lost. They had amazing players. That was before I met Fernando. And we saw the same thing. So we connected a lot on that. Over over time, I knew him for 30 years. We met quite often. And that was the one thing that was constant. There were many other things that we had differences on, but that was the one thing. So for example, right now I'm watching the European Cup. I'm certain Fernando would have come over to my house one of these days and we would have watched some games together if he was still here. He did that constantly, especially after I got a 75-inch TV. He loved it. But my wife didn't like it because we were always shouting in the living room. So that was a constant for 30 years. We'd constantly get back together to talk about football. I won't go into the politics, but we had a lot of differences there, especially at the end. But I'll tell you a few other things he really liked. He liked driving fast and dangerously. He really did. And I was with him quite a few times when he did it. I remember one time we were driving to Duke, 8, 9 o'clock at night. Turn off the lights on the vehicle because no cars were coming. And he just drive in the darkness, 60, 70 miles an hour. And I said, why did you turn off the light? He said, well, I can see the oncoming vehicles better with their I said, that's crazy, man.
Yeah, he had a scientific explanation.
He had some reasonings. Here's another one. We'd get at a stoplight. It's not that late, but there are no cars coming. And we have a red light. And he'd do something like this. We had to make a left turn. He'd turn right into the traffic. There was no traffic coming. So he'd run the red light, but there are no cars coming. And then he'd do this. Brazil! That's what he did. That's Fernando. It gives you a little sense of what he was like. And he was proud. Here's another one. Well, it's a sad one. When I met him, he really loved Formula One racing. And he adored Ayrton Senna. He couldn't stop talking about Ayrton Senna, who was a champion Formula One racer, who was from Brazil, of course. And then, some years after that, Ayrton Senna died in a terrible car crash. And I know it really, really hurt him. It was a big, big, big tragedy to Fernando. This was most of what I remember from when I first met him the first 10 years. That was one of the sad events. But here's a happy one. When he started building his house in Chapel Hill, Barry mentioned it. I can still remember that. We had just started working together as Duke in the same lab. And a lot of times you wouldn't see Fernando. And one day he called, it was late in the evening, and he said, come with me. And we drove. And he drove me to this empty lot. It was in Chapel Hill, a really nice neighborhood. It was right next to Ted's family's house. But at the time, I didn't know Ted. But it was an empty lot. And he showed me this lot. And he said, this is where I'm going to build my house. I said, really? It looked like a terrible location. It was like down a hill, up a hill. It was like really bad. But he was really proud. And for several years, he really put his soul into that place. It was like his next child, first child, really. That's all he could talk about. That's all he could think about. It was unbelievable to see someone like him completely obsessed like that. And he was happy when he was obsessed like that. So I was glad when I remember he finally finished the house. Really was happy when he finally did that. Those are really moments I remember with him. And I'll tell you one of the things, this is just an example of how he was. So one day, he's building the house. He's doing the landscaping on the house. Back then he used to drive an old Toyota Tercel. You remember those little hatchbacks? And we're driving from Duke and we cross a railroad track where they're pulling out the railroad ties. And we could see them just a little further down. As we're crossing the railroad track, he turns immediately and does a U-turn and parks on the side and runs over to the people pulling out the railroad ties. And he says, he comes back and he says, I want you to help me get some of those railroad ties. I said, why? He said, I want to put them in my front yard, you know, kind of as a brace for all the dirt. He's looting dirt all the time and gravel. And I said, sure, all right. So we go over to the railroad ties, and they're really big and heavy. And it takes the two of us to lift them up, and he puts them in this little Toyota Tercel. We put like 4 of them. And then he goes in the car, and I'm going to go in the car myself, and I realize the back of the car is down like this. It was amazing. And somehow when we got in the front seat, it kind of pushed everything back down, and we were able to slowly drive all the way back to Chapel Hill to his house. And the car was just leaning back all the time. It was unbelievable. That was just Fernando. They give you a sense of Fernando. There were all of these weird things that had happened. For whatever reason, he'd seek me out to do these crazy things. He knew I'd go along. I'd never said no to Fernando. Of course, I told you, he was the best man. And I appreciated that. I'll tell you one more story. Jim, a few people have briefly mentioned it. When Fernando first came here, he worked for Marty Rodbell at NIH, where Jim Button is from. It turned out later on, Marty Rodbell won the Nobel Prize. He opened up a vast field in this science that many of us worked in. They call it second messenger type signaling. Anyway, at some point, after he had worked at Duke, he moved back and worked with Marty again. But very soon after, Marty died. This was in the late 90s. And Fernando, like with most things, he became very obsessed with certain things. And in this case, it was to memorialize Marty Rodbell. So he spent a lot of time with Marty's widow. If any of you don't know, she's a very old lady. She actually knew Anne Frank. She was from Europe.
Wow.
So sometimes if you go on YouTube, you'll find videos of her being interviewed. And she tells her personal experience. I think it was in Holland, when she was older than Anne Frank actually. So she said her sister, the family knew each other, and she knew personally Anne Frank. But anyway, going back to Marty. When Marty died, Fernando would take me around to see his widow, and he was getting all of these things that memorialized Marty. And he kept them all in his garage in that house in Chapel Hill. And even when he moved here, he brought them with him. Still had this dream that he'd memorialize Marty Rodbell. He was really a passionate fan of Marty Rodbell. And when he was into something like that, when he was obsessed, as he could become sometimes, it was fun. It was fun to see him with that spirit. What happened over time was, say, after the 1990s were finished, he became less and less obsessed with things like Marty. But the one thing he kept constant was soccer, Brazilian soccer especially. So I'm sorry we won't get together again. That's pretty much it.
Thanks, Dave.
My name's Ted. Fernando was my neighbor in Chapel Hill. My mom and dad for 5 years. I met him in 2000. I was walking down the road in the snow. He was standing at the end of his driveway, cussing. He was pissed off because there was so much snow and he wasn't going to be able to go to the store and get some cigarettes. And I had some cigarettes in my pocket. Reached him, handed him a handful of cigarettes, and we talked. And I thought he was kind of cool and could barely understand what he was saying. And talked for a little while, and I walked back home. And I asked my mom, I said, who's that funny sounding guy with the cool-looking house? She said, well, that's Fernando. You really like Fernando. And she was right. I did. Later on that summer, I was building this giant retaining wall, all cut up, and it's kind of cool. And Fernando would sit on his porch and watch me build that wall. And I had a little bit of a temper. And he would say, come over here, sit and talk with me. And I would go sit and talk with him and drink a beer and smoke a cigarette, share some bad habits. We did, unfortunately. But we became friends, and he encouraged me to not get so angry and to keep on going. He always encouraged me, never judged me. And over the next 21 years, we became best friends. He was my shrink, my doctor, any kind of medication I was taking. He'd spend hours looking it up. Today I take the medication I do now because of Fernando. He recommended it, and it probably saved my life. And Fernando saved my life more than once. He moved to Mebane, and we became closer. We go sit on that porch and talk about politics, a lot about politics. I think he created a monster, because I can't shut up either. I guess the most special times I had with Fernando was during COVID. We had a COVID bubble, and it was very seldom intruded upon. Fernando had his chair over there. My chair was over here, 20 feet apart, and there was a tape measure sitting on that chair right next to me. And that's what that tape measure was for. We got an argument. He said, that's not 20 feet. I said, it's 20 feet, Fernando. We became really close during the time of COVID. I tried to make sure that I made it over to his house 2 or 3 times a week. And we would sit and talk for hours about politics, about politics, about politics. Donald Trump. That was fun. It was a very interesting time, COVID and Trump. There was a lot of stuff to talk about, and we did. And we had fun with it. We had fun. We made the best out of the time that it was. But he got sick, and he knew he was sick. And the time kind of went on during COVID, and it got a little old. Fernando was depressed. I was doing all I could to try to get him in a better mood. You know, there was a lot of shit to make fun of, you know, and it just wasn't funny anymore. And, you know, we'd sit on his front porch, and just politics was no fun anymore, and it got to the point where we would just sit there and just sit there. You know, and we started counting the number of white trucks that went by. And we would watch the children. You know, before COVID happened, we'd sit and watch those children in that park, and we just love to listen to that sound. You know, listen to those kids. Isn't that wonderful? We listen to all those kids. You know, and then COVID came, and that kind of changed a little bit. We didn't enjoy that. It wasn't fun. You know, and counting the white trucks got old. Fernando was tired. There was nothing I could do. Now, I think a lot of people tried really, really hard. But Fernando was depressed. And it was a tough time. It was a really tough time. He was my best friend. He saved my life more than once. I love him, man. I miss him. I don't have anybody to talk to anymore about politics. Everybody tells me to shut up too. But he cared. He cared about people. He cared about me. And I'll always miss you, Fernando. Thank you.
To meet Fernando, I was actually kind of scared of him at first because he had this really intense glare. If you met him, you know it's like a study. I was trying to equate that to like some animal or in the forest, and I thought about an owl. And it just kind of like sits there and studies you, and then eventually he'll be telling you what you need to be doing. And at that point, I'm like, I already have a dad. I don't need that, So of course now I've lost my dad and Fernando within about 6 months, so it's been kind of tough. But the one thing that I think he's left me, he was a really good friend to me as well, is that being that kind of, being honest and open with me and telling me what I should be doing. It's kind of like being a conscience. And this is kind of a little bit of illustrates his conundrum, the conundrum about him too, is that he would tell other people what they should be doing, and when he won't do what he should be doing. And so that was very frustrating, but that's one of the things about him. So I've decided that I would take his advice and maybe start doing a little bit more. Two things. The first is, I have to tell the joke first. It's not really a joke, but it's another story that he told me. It won't take too long, I don't think. This was at NIEHS, and somebody in the department, I guess Fernando was giving advice, and this person said, why don't you do more experiments? And Fernando's the one that's telling me about this, because he's like, he couldn't believe somebody was saying this to him, I guess, and he said, his response was, well, why don't you take more time to think? So he was a good thinker, he definitely mastered that craft. But that was one of the things that maybe I don't do enough of, is to I get involved in the busy world of my job and other stuff going on. So I want to take more time and think about things and maybe get back into politics, because that was the other thing. Feel the burn. I think he did have some passion for that, and so I think that's something that's a worthwhile way to spend my time in Fernando's honor.
He loved that front porch, and he lived there for a number of years, and then one day I broke it to him that my daughter was coming back to town and I was going to be leaving the place. So it was really a difficult time for him because he didn't want to leave. But with a little help packing his stuff for him and coaxing him out of the house, he finally just down the street a few houses away. But he was always a kind soul. He did a lot of things for people. Some neighbors on the streets that lived down below me, a gentleman going through a hard time. He paid for his power bill, paid for his water bill, helped find him some help. So yeah, Fernando was a great researcher. People have difficult times. He would look up some information, got him information about banking, got his house refinanced so he could keep it at that time. Yeah, he was a very kind soul, and he would allow people to use his truck to run the loads for a load of mulch or a couple bags of concrete. Hearing everybody share their little bits about him, he's sitting up there now, drinking a cup of coffee on the front porch with the sun shining in his face.
Wine.
I feel that I should actually speak more about Fernando's life or our lives, because none of you know how Fernando was when I met him. As I said, he was not even 16 and I was 14. We met at the beach during Carnival, and I must say, on those days I never thought about this, but the circle or the cycle, whatever, actually the circle better said, was going to end the way it did. But I met Fernando driving a car. I mean, Fernando came from a very modest family, but part of his family, like uncles, they were quite wealthy. And so at the beach where my family had and still has a beach house, and we all spent the summers, during Carnival we were there, and then I met Fernando. He was driving a very expensive, like top of the whatever, with everything that you could imagine that car had that belonged to his uncle. And he was at that beach because his uncle rented a house just to spend Carnival, which is a big thing in Brazil, And so that's how we met. But what caught my attention is that, first and foremost, for those who do not know, he was extremely good looking. Nothing like what we have got to know of Fernando in the last few years of his life. And so he was driving that car, and with one hand, and the other hand, he had, I am not exaggerating, a glass that tall filled with single malt scotch.
16.
So the drinking issue, whatever you say, problem was there from time zero, as we say in science. But in my mind, as a teenager, I see that guy driving that car. Wow, how can this happen? Because none of our friends were all the same age. Nobody drove a car, let alone with alcohol, But anyway, so we started dating, like I said. My dad would like to see the devil, but not Fernando. And my mom was like Fernando's best allied person, because she was always trying to be in between the father and the daughter on behalf of Fernando. But what I want to say is he had a very intense personality, for all that you guys have already said, and so do I. People don't realize how I am until I'm upset. And so it was two type A personalities, loving each other a lot from time zero, but at the same time he wanted to impose his likes on me, and I want to impose my likes on him. And it was very troublesome. So throughout our lives, until I was 23 years old and he was 25, when we got married, we always broke together, separated, together, separated. I went to medical school. I was 2 years behind Fernando. And I remember the days that I would go, to class on a Monday, and then my medical student, colleagues, friends, girlfriends would say, "Oh, how was your weekend, Carl?" We just broke up, and then they would be like, yeah, when it's going to be together again? I mean, it was like people did not even take it seriously. And of course, what I want to say is, when I met Fernando, what drove me the most in terms of being, involved with him was his young intellect. You may think that I'm a nerd. In some ways, I was a nerd. But also I would play with the crazies too. I had both ways, you know. But I cannot deny that it impressed me to the max. When Fernando, he was studying or in preparation for medical school, when he would be reciting, literally describing to me as we were dating, 14, 16, the entire menstrual cycle. I mean, I'm talking about from A to Z with all the hormones up and down, and in the midst of that, I was surrounded by my cousins, male cousins, you know, female cousins and friends, all 14, 15-year-old kids, and they were like, what? This is crazy. Nobody cared about that, but I just felt, wow. And he did everything he could do to realize his dreams, talking about when I spoke earlier. He could not come to the United States because his family did not have the means to allow him to come. And yet, he would find his way out as he did. So those were the things that really attracted me in regards to Fernando, because I was a very studious person, even though I did crazy things too, but I could see that side of his and how that differentiated him as compared to all my other friends of those days, you know. And so when we got married, we had a million dreams to come to the United States as we did. We spent 5 years living in Houston, Texas, and because of his work with Lutz Birnbaumer, who eventually became a member of the Academy of Sciences, and who was actually the postdoctoral of Mary Rodibel when they were discovering the findings that led to Mary Rodibel winning the Nobel Prize in 1994. So Mary Rodibel went to Houston to give a talk, and this is how Fernando met Mary Rodibel. And then he offered Fernando a job, and the rest you know. And of course, because we came to an IHS, that's how we met Jim Patney, who became a very good friend of ours, and still is a good friend of mine and a mentor. He was in my thesis committee. Then I did a postdoctoral 5 years in his lab. We were all together. But my point again back to Fernando is that perhaps we, to a certain extent, were driven by a dream that was coming true. Because of him, I never, on those days, ever would have thought about leaving my country, coming to the United States, because I was in medical school. You know, the odds are I would have become a medical doctor, perhaps meet someone, maybe not at all, but anyway, stay there like a lot of my friends did forever. Because of him, he interfered in my life in a way that he changed my path. And this is why I'm here today. So, about our house that David Sheen was describing, that house was that Barry helped build. That house was, in part, a reflection of some of those dreams. That, yes, he was possessed that house. Yes, when he gets into something, he would not relax, which was sometimes very annoying. He would drain at least my energy, But that house was part of the dream. And as a matter of fact, talking about the Formula One race and how he was completely saddened by the death of Ayrton Senna. And I know very much when it was 1994, we were finishing building the house. And then Fernando comes and says, oh my God, did you hear the news? Well, this is to say that our house was actually a mini cemetery because he planted a tree for Ayrton Senna. Who would do that? He planted a tree for my grandmother, who died in 1993. He planted a tree for my grandfather, who died in 1994. And he planted a tree for my dad, who died in 1995. So it was very hard for me to decide throughout the years that, unfortunately, I had to part with all that. As my mother always used to say, in the midst of all this crisis that we have gone through, Carla, that is just a house. Carla, that is just a yard. And I said, no, it's not just the house. It is what it signifies. It is the symbolism of it. But eventually it had to end, which I chose to. But nevertheless, we continue to be friends. And like I said, I will never forget what Fernando did for my family And for me, to a certain time, nobody else would have done better. So yes, all those things that you are hearing today is true, and there is far more. And to me, his death really affected me in a maximal level because I never wanted that to happen to him, and especially how it happened. Like Ted said, he was sick. We knew he was sick, but living so far from him, I had no idea how sick he was. And as the situation became worse, and he was talking to me several times a week, I obviously was saying, you have to see a doctor, you have to see a doctor. And I know in retrospect that he was just lying to me. Oh, I went to a doctor. What did you say? Oh, nothing. Oh, nothing. So the fact that he died the way he did, and to me again, talking about contradictions about Fernando, to me this was very contradictory because, like several here have said, Fernando was best friend for so many people. Fernando always was ready to help people, and I can tell about my own family. He would get engaged in a way that nobody else would, and he wanted the best for every single person. And so how he started deteriorating physically and perhaps mentally so much, and he did not accept anybody's help, because all of us want to help. I remember on the days when he was still speaking with me, answering my phone calls, but eventually he became reclusive. He would not talk to his family in Brazil anymore. He would not talk to friends here. He would not talk to me. I remember phone calls in exchange that I would say, if you don't let me take you to a doctor, I'm going to go to your house unsolicitedly, and I'm going to appear there out of the blue. And if you don't open the door, I'll call the authorities. Of course, I didn't do that, but I'm the one who called the Mebane police for a wellness check, and that's how they found him. So again, unfortunately, he left us. I will forever have this question mark in my mind, and I know it's in the minds of so many, if not all. Why did this happen the way it happened? Why someone who was always ready, eager to help everybody and to tell everybody what to do, how to be treated, and so on, how did he let it go like that? And of course, to make it even worse, when I spoke with the police, they were telling me that there was going to be an autopsy done on him. Well, there was no autopsy done on him. When I got his death certificate, they basically was written there. Medical examiner, was there an autopsy performed? No. I called them and I said, I don't understand that. This should be a required situation because he was alone. Nobody was with him. And they said, oh, the medical examiner did not deem necessary because of the state he was found. His medical friends in Brazil and elsewhere here in the US, nobody accepted that. But this is to say that's what it is. And we'll forever live our lives until I die with all these questions, not knowing about this contradictory behavior. If he was always able to help everybody, how come he was not able to help himself? So, but this is what it is. So I slowly but surely I'm come to have peace in my mind because I have to accept, but it's not easy. As a scientist, I have data. It may be perhaps completely, data from anywhere, everywhere, and I'm supposed to put all the data hopefully together and hypothesize. And unfortunately, right now I can't. I do have hypotheses actually, but I don't think, But anyway, I just want to say that it was because of him that I'm ending eventually my life, I believe. In North Carolina, I became a scientist. He was very instrumental for me to want to be a scientist. We had many fights, but on the early stages of my career, I cannot deny how he influenced me. And so forever, from these aspects, I will be forever thankful for him.
Still I swear I remember every face of every man who put me here.
Everybody help us now.
I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, anyway now, I shall be released.
They say every man needs protection. They say that every man must fall. Yet I swear I see my reflection somewhere so high against a wall.
I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, any way now, I shall be released. Well, somewhere down here in this lonely crowd, they see a man, they just feel such shame. You know, all day long you hear him cry so loud, calling out how he's been framed. I see my life come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, any way now, I shall be released. Yes, any day now, any way now, I shall be released. Oh, these strange times. Just heard you left us behind. Didn't get to say goodbye. No salutations, no chance to cry. You always gave a laugh, you always gave a smile, offered a smoke and a joke in your own style. No need to ask why, time has come to say goodbye. No need to ask why, I want to see you again in the sweet by and by, in the sweet by and by. Family calls from far away, miss you on this day, can't count all the names, or all of the faces, of all the friends you made, and all the places you stayed. No need to ask why, the time has come to say goodbye. No need to ask why. I want to see you again in the sweet by and by, in the sweet by and by. What eyes have seen, what ears have heard, together we will find the emerging word. May the peace of God be with you always. No need to ask why, the time has come to say goodbye. No need to ask why, I want to see you again in the sweet by and by, in the sweet by and by. Now here's the audience participation card. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. Go in peace, my friend. In peace we will go. They were shining there for you and me, for liberty, Fernando.
No, I never thought that we could lose. There's no regret.
If I had to do the same again, I wouldn't, my friend Fernando. If I had to do the same again, I wouldn't, my friend Fernando.
Now we're old and gray, Fernando. And since many years I haven't seen a rifle in your hand. Do you hear the drums, Fernando? Do you still recall the fateful night we crossed the Rio Grande? I can see it in your eyes, how proud you were to fight for freedom in this land.
There was something in the air that night. The stars were bright, Fernando. They were shining there for you and me, for liberty, Fernando.
Though I never thought that we could lose,
There's no regret. If I had to do the same again, I would, my friend Fernando. There was something in the air that night. The stars were bright, Fernando. They were shining there for you and me, for liberty, Fernando.
though I never thought that we could lose, there's no regret.
If I had to do the same again, I would, my friend Fernando. If I had to do the same again, I would, my friend Fernando. If I had to do the same again, I would, my friend Fernando.
Caminando y cantando, he seguido alcanzado, como todos igual, brazos dados o não, nas escolas, nas ruas, campos con soy, caminando y cantando y seguindo a cansado. Ven, vamos embora, esperar nada saber. Quem sabe faz a hora, nada espera acontecer. Oh, ven, vamos embora, esperar nada saber. Quem sabe faz a hora, nada espera acontecer. Walking and singing and following the song. Together we are equal, whether going arm in arm. In schools, in the streets, in fields or in town. Walking and singing and following the song. Come on, let's go, who hesitates just shows what they don't know. Who really knows won't wait around as the wind begins to blow. Come on, let's go, who hesitates just shows what they don't know. Who really knows won't wait around as the wind begins to blow. A soldados armados, amados o não, quase todos perdidos de armas na mão. Os que ensinam a antiga lição de morrer pela pátria e viver sem razão. Vem, vamos embora, esperar não é saber. Quem sabe faz a hora, não espera acontecer. Vem, vamos embora, esperar não é saber. Quem sabe faz a hora, não espera acontecer. There are soldiers to love and others to forget, but every last one of them is emptied of regret. The lies and the guns, they go hand in hand. To live without thinking and die upon command. Come on, let's go, who hesitates just shows what they don't know. Who really knows won't wait around as the wind begins to blow. Come on, let's go, who hesitates just shows what they don't know. Who really knows won't wait around as the wind begins to blow. Pelos campos ao fome, grandes plantações, pelas ruas marchando, indeciso cordões, anda fazendo a flor seu mais forte refrão. Acreditam nas flores, vencendo o canhão. Oh, vem, vamos embora, esperar não é saber. Quem sabe faz a hora, a espera acontecer. Come on, let's go, who hesitates just shows what they don't know. Who really knows won't wait around for the wind begins to blow. Vem, vamos embora, esperar não é saber. Quem sabe faz a hora, não espera acontecer. flowers I ordered, and his bed